Alright, good morning guys. I am going to be building the Morserino M32 kit, and I thought I'd video it for you to help you guys when you build yours. So first thing we got here is the board. Okie dokie. Let's see, what else do we got? We got this bag of parts here. According to the manual, we should first solder on, first read all the instructions. Alright. I'll just close that for a second. Rotary encoder, red button. Alright. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Alright. So we got these 4 phone jacks. So what you'll need to do is you'll look at the footprint and you'll line them up onto the board where they belong. Each one has a slightly different footprint. These two here are the same, so I'm gonna be lining them up based on the footprint on the board. There we go. Now I'll need to solder them, and I might just have to just do it one at a time. So if I flip this over, they fall out. So I'm just going to, you can use a piece of tape to hold them in place. Do I have my tape here? I used to have tape. I wonder if I can pause this to get tape. It's okay. Alright, so what I'm going to do instead of tape is I got my handy hands, and I'm going to use it to hold the part in place like that. Okay, that looks fine. Now I'm going to zoom in for you. So I got my soldering iron and my solder. I'm just gonna hold it to the tab, heat it up a little bit, apply the solder at the base, use enough solder to coat the whole pad, and then release. Now that the part is held in place by the one tab, I can go through and solder the other 3. Alright, that's one. This small one here is stayed in place when I flipped it over, so I'm just going to solder it. Another thing you can do is you can bend some of the tabs to hold them in place, which is another common practice, and then that way they won't fall out while you are soldering. You'll want to make sure your soldering iron is hot enough, and I guess it depends on your solder. This solder here is 6040 tin lead, 0.032 diameter, 3.3% flux, and I have my soldering iron set to 315C roughly. And you just have to wait a second or two for it to heat up, and then the solder will just melt. Which is what you want. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm gonna flip it around or do the other side. Let's see. Once you have one piece tacked on, you can take the tape off if you used it, and it should be held in place by that one pin that already has the solder. I'm gonna just check. Yep, it's flat against the board, which is what I want. Good. I'm going to rotate it because the tabs are sideways, and it'll be easier to solder if I put the soldering iron on the flat end. And again, I just rotate the board to get easier access to the solder point. Okay. So that's 3 of them. Where'd that 4th one go? There it is. So I got my 4th one here. That fell out. I'm going to flip it over, line it back up again, put it in. Since this one fell out, oh, they're really tiny tabs, so what I'm going to do is like I mentioned before, you can use a piece of tape, or I have my handy hand device here, so I'm going to actually just flip this over, and I'm going to use this to hold it in place like that. So with the handy hand device pushing against the back of it, it will, oh. Oh, you know what? I have tape. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. I forgot. I cleaned out my desk at work, so I now have tape here. So I'm just going to take a piece of tape, and I'm going to use it to tape the component to the board, so that way when I flip it over, it holds in place. So now I can zoom in and do the soldering. And as I mentioned, once you get one solder joint done, the part's not going to move anymore, so you can do the rest of them pretty easily. Okay, I'm gonna clean off the end of my soldering iron. It's good to get off the extra solder so that you have a nice flat tool to work with. Alright, so I can take that off, save it for later. Alright, let's see, next. Trimmer resistor. So this here is the trimmer resistor. The manual says orientation does not matter. So we look on the board, and you see right here, this is where it goes. So I am going to place it on there. You may have to bend the pins a little bit to get it to fit in the board. But once you get it, although it says it doesn't matter, and it doesn't, because one way you just turn it one way, to adjust the other you turn it the other. But it does, the solder, the screen printing does have a 1, 2, and 3, and on the part there's also a 3, so you could line it up based on that if you really wanted to. So if you see, I just bent this pin out a little bit so that the resistor isn't going to move when I solder it. Flip it upside down. Here we go. Okay, those ones are now soldered on. Perfect. All right, next. And the slide switch. So here is the sliding switch. Make sure that when you mount it on the board right here, that the switch is towards the outside of the board. So again, I'm just gonna pop it in. This one, again, I'm gonna need my piece of tape to hold it in place. So you just put it down, touch it to the board, and I'm gonna try and do this this outside one first, or I might even use this helping hands device to try and push on it to keep it flat. All right, that looks good. So here we go. Looks good to me. Clean off my soldering iron. All right. You can see here the piece is flat against the board. Store the tape for later. All right. Then the rotary encoder and push button switch. All right. So this here is the rotary encoder. You'll see it has 1, 2, 3 pins on one side, 2 pins on the other. This one you're going to want to make sure you solder all the pins. That way it works properly. So it goes right here on the board. And you'll want to make sure you get it straight up and down so that it fits underneath the plastic casing that the kit comes in. There you go. So I got mine flat on the board. I'm going to flip it over. These 2 pins here are sort of like holding it in place. There's a little force on those. So I'm just going to solder it that way as it is. I'm going to rotate this because the flat end is going the other way, and it'll just make it easier for me. There we go. There we go. Perfect. You'll want to make sure you fill all the holes completely and that you can't see through on the other side when you're done. And that's just one way to double check that you got a good connection. Okay, I'm gonna do the big pieces, just because, to be thorough. Oh. That looks good. Okay. Next, we got our push button. There's 4 pins. Let's see. Flip. The push button goes right next to the rotary encoder. Let's see if there's any sort of... Be particularly careful. It has a tendency to end up slightly slanted. It might not fit in the... Alright. Oh, perfect. So the push button only fits in one way. So it doesn't matter if you do it this way or this way. So, but as long as you get it in there in the proper way that it fits, it should work fine. Because it's symmetrical. Okay, yeah, that'll work. There we go. Now, to get this one flat, it might again be useful to use your piece of tape. And if that doesn't seem to work well, you can use my other method where you sort of push up against it with another device, like your handy hand. Or you might need to bend the legs to hold it in place. There we go. So I'm pinching it with my handy hand to hold it on the board. And I'm just going to solder one end first, and then we'll check to make sure it's flat. Okay. So we got one soldered. We flip it over. It's flat against the board. And if I really want, I can probably pull out the plexiglass, and we will check and make sure that it fits through perfectly. Gonna pull the tape off. There we go. Okay, let's see. So it would go like this. And obviously you would have to, I guess, line up the holes with the screws to double check, but considering how it's flat on the board, I'm not worried about it. So on to solder the next few pieces of that. All right, flip it over, still flat, good. Clean the soldering iron. Okay, next. If you don't have one of these neat metal things, you can also use a sponge to wet the sponge, and then you can wipe the soldering iron on that. All right, next. Alright, next it says make sure the switch is in the off position to the phone jack and all your pieces are flat. Mine are, so I'm going to proceed. Alright, connect the cable with the small 1.25mm JST connector to the connector on the underside of the Hell-Tech module. Be careful not to push the socket on the module off the board. Alright, so now we go into the box again to get the last piece. We got our Hell-Tech module and the screws and the antenna connector. So we're going to pull out the module, being careful. Oh no, low battery. Alright. I think I'm going to have to stop this video and I'll start up again with a fresh battery. One moment.